Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine the show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience at SmithWeekly, including Gordon S., Jared W., Jack T., and Andy J. A new guest on the program today, we have Mr. Scot Evans on the show. Scott is the Chief Executive Officer of Recon Energy Africa. The company is establishing a potential new onshore oil exploration district in northeastern Namibia through their exploration grounds in the Kavango Basin. Recon Africa is an elite portfolio holding at SmithWeekly Research. The company is listed on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the symbol RECO and also on the US OTC markets under the symbol RECAF. Mr. Evans, thanks for coming on the show.
Andrew, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Well, Scott, just for the audience, we had, stated to our audience on Twitter that, of course, Craig would also be on the show, but Craig had some other pressing appointments and he couldn't join. But Scott is the more interesting guy here, and I'm sure Craig would agree. So
thank you.
Let's start out here. How about your view, Scott, because you're a veteran of this industry globally, overall oil market view at this point, and where do you see the price of oil going, say, over the next 1 to 2 years?
Yeah, in all the years I've been in the markets, and I joined Exxon back in the 80s, just in time for the one of the big crashes. This to me has been the most difficult one because there's just so many overprinting trends. But overall, and this is going to be my opinion, just based on what I see here in the U.S., because I still have lots of friends working in the Permian and such, I think it's going to be constructive for a while. I think you're seeing, especially in the U.S. and in particular in Texas, people are out. There's traffic jams. The airports are getting full, and so these airlines are using jet fuel. I just think it's going to be constructive for a while. You see price numbers all over the place, but to me, if and I'll just put my Permian Basin hat on. If we have numbers in the $70 a barrel range, that's good for good projects. And I think what we've learned over the last couple of years is you need good projects. As a geologist, I know the rocks are not all good. You have to really work it and just not assume everything you touch in a shale play, for example, is going to be good. We're involved in conventional oil in Namibia and Botswana. Our costs are going to be lower. And so this kind of a pricing for us is, if we're in the 70s, we're in lovely shape.
Scott, what do you think? Let's look out a year or two in advance. And as the oil price probably stays the same or goes higher, what's your thoughts on, people getting incentivized and motivated to go out and do exploration work when the price is, let's call it $90, $100 a barrel? Do you see that ultimately that once again, we get into the cyclical nature of this business and price goes up, everybody starts an oil company and eventually supply becomes a problem again?
I think there's a really strong possibility that supply will become a problem. I think that's inevitable. I mean, we all look at ourselves in a transition, from 100% fossil fuels to what the future may have. And it's, not going to be even in terms of demand. I think, there's going to be more demand before the new things are ready, is what I mean there. Now, does everybody go up and start an oil company? I think there was a lot of froth before the pandemic, and so certainly that's moved out. But I think you'll see serious people with experience coming back in, definitely.
Yeah, agreed. Environmental pressures and climate change pressures continue to reduce the potential for future supply and of course permitting of projects and so forth. And so that's also a new component that comes in. And with this ESG push, which we'll talk about in a moment, that a lot of these companies don't meet that criteria for ESG. Some do, some good ones, but that's also another pressure that's going to persist for a while. I'm not sure if it's something that will be here forever, but it's certainly going to be here for the foreseeable future.
I mean, we're counting on it, and it's part of our corporate strategy. We're kind of unique in the sense that we're, as a new exploration company without production assets right now, we're net zero, right? And our goal is to stay net zero even as we begin to produce. And we'll talk about that a little more in some more detail. But I think we're unique with that position, but we're committed to doing everything we can, both in terms of offsets and new technologies to stay net zero.
Well, let's chat a little bit more about that in a moment, but let's come back here for a moment. You've got some good background and experience. Why don't you take off from Exxon and give us your resume?
Sure. Yeah, I have a master's degree in geology. I got recruited out of school to work for Exxon out in sunny California. So not too many oil and gas folks can say their first job was in Ventura. But I had overall a dozen years with Exxon, both in production and exploration, dominantly in the U.S. I had an opportunity to leave Exxon after 12 years to join a startup company called Landmark Graphics, which for those who are in the business will realize or remember, Landmark started the 3D seismic visualization and interpretation boom. Right after that, we were bought by Halliburton back when Dick Cheney was running things. And so I stayed with Halliburton for 25 years after that. I after doing some work on the products, for interpretation, I ran the subsurface consulting group, which was mainly an international group. But so I started working in the Eastern Hemisphere quite a bit. And then I also expanded my role ultimately to be a vice president and an officer of Halliburton, and managed our oil and gas asset group. So we had properties that we, invested with and brought other investors into that we thought were really strong, and actually had used Halliburton technologies to make them stronger. Took early retirement from that in 2019. Was looking around, and I'd known Craig Stanke, the founder of Reconnaissance Africa, for a number of years. We helped them out in Europe, and we were offsetting operators in Mexico. And the more I started to look at the acreage they had and did my own research, talked to some of the PhD guys that are done some of the work in the area, Ansgar Wanke and Jim Granath, the more I felt that this was a really unique play for a number of reasons, and decided to join first, as essentially advising geologist and a chief operating officer, then I became CEO just under a year ago. So that's me.
Yeah, Scott, I've just an extensive background. And before we get into Recon Africa here, a real quick summary before we get into the details, but I want to come back to energy for a moment. Because you're involved with the oil business, you've seen this transition that's occurred over the years and various attempts at trying to create energy from other sources. How do you look at the world of energy today, and what's your preference on what energy should be?
I think the word I used earlier is probably the right one, in transition. Oil and gas is ultimately a finite resource. Ultimately, as a geologist, I can look in the rock record and see climate change. Now, in my case, I view it over millions of years, but nonetheless, I think that we have to be mindful of worldview. But I really do see oil and gas having an important role for a long time. And I'll emphasize that on the developing nations, like what you see in Africa, other parts of Asia, that the developing nations have the right to become energy independent. And so, and they're sovereign, so they have the right to decide what to do with their resources. So, in particular, there's my view on energy, as in oil and gas, but then there's also what's the right of a sovereign who might have a resource. And to me, that's really, really important that that's handled from their perspective properly.
Yeah, certainly agreed there. And I would just do a plug for nuclear power. I'm a big fan, no secret. You're right, because there's more than just the energy component to it. If you're a developing nation and you're looking to maybe develop your natural resources as a foundation to really economic success, in my view, you have to run this like a business. And the fact of the matter is, sovereigns, some of them are better at treating their government like a business versus, others. But you're absolutely right. Natural resource development in a lot of these nations, unless you're like a small, island nation somewhere, this is very critical to, building out your economic profile from an infrastructure standpoint, transition energy, and then obviously to a more sophisticated form of energy that might be more costly to get in place initially, but is affordable later. So I fully agree with your thought process there to leave, the freedom of choice with regards to, sovereign decisions and so forth. Well, let's look at Recon here. Why don't you
Mhm.
give me that 1 to 2 minute summary of just the company and current status?
Okay, thanks. Recon Africa is laser focused on the exploration and development of an area called the Kavango Basin. It's in northeast Namibia and northwest Botswana. We have kind of unique, we have leasehold that covers the entire basin, 8.5 million acres. It's one of the largest undeveloped hydrocarbon basins in the world onshore. We like the area for a lot of reasons, both under the ground and above the ground. Under the ground, we can talk about some of the geology and the technical aspects that we like. But above the ground, you're talking about two of the stablest and longest lived democracies in Africa. As somebody who's worked in Africa quite a bit, all the way up including Saharan Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, working in Namibia and Botswana is just very, very, very straightforward. They are good infrastructures, rule of law, and reasonable license contracts. Recon Africa has a very senior technical team. It's almost, I feel like I'm coaching an all-star team sometimes, from the geologist through the geophysicist and geochemists, and then our environmental team. We have people who've worked around the world, who know their domains, and are all extremely positive about this basin going forward. I mean, the technical guys like myself, there's remuneration and there's pride in your life's activity. And to me, this whole team is really focused on what's probably one of the most important and interesting opportunities in the subsurface for oil and gas in the world right now. We have a good cash position, about 70 million roughly, but we're in the middle of drilling our second well and about to, with acquisition of our environmental impact assessment permits, begin our first 2D seismic program. So that's the company in a nutshell.
Yeah, Scott, I appreciate that and certainly agreed on the potential here. And the market is certainly starting to respect that potential. One thing that came to mind, the Kavango Basin, generally not really known at all. And I think a group that's probably notable on the listed company front that has been, active in Africa would be, the Lundin Group, Africa Oil, International Petroleum, a couple others. But what's the thought process there? I mean, you've been around the world, you've seen a lot of these comparable type projects. You guys have this entire basin. What's your thoughts on comparability, or maybe we can't compare?
It's just phases of the oil and gas resource life cycle. The Kavango, I did my own due diligence when I took early retirement from Halliburton, and there was lots of things that I could do. The Kavango is interesting and is probably where it is in terms of development today because of really two things. One is that the surface is really all Kalahari Desert. So it's a little difficult to get those telltales from surface geology and mapping. We've done all the regional mapping to the, around the points of the compass in the area, so we know what that can tell us. But it's everything else is obviously in the desert. And then politically, Namibia in particular has only been a sovereign nation since the 90s. It started out as a German colony. It was then a South African colony. It had several challenges over those years of colonization, but emerged in the 90s, and basically didn't have a petroleum regime. So their first attempt at it was a little bit challenging, and really the second attempt, which is what we're under right now, was quite reasonable, and they did their homework. But that was early 2000s. So to compare to, say, the East Africa Rift and some other players there, which are well in the development phase, you have to kind of roll the clock back 20 odd years or so in terms of where we are. The nearest well control was, I believe, 170 kilometers away. And we were really just going on aeromag data to see the basin to begin with. And that data wasn't available to the 2000s. So it's kind of apples and oranges in a sense between those other areas in terms of just, you could actually work in Namibia, or it was an available economic opportunity. And then frankly, just, the paucity of data. But again, when we looked around, we looked at the regional geology, we felt based on, if you look at Jim Granath's published work, that there was a rift system coming through here. All of the onshore plays, certainly in recent years, unless you go to some of the coastal plays, are based on rift basins, East Africa Rift, Central Africa Rift. And so we know that is a good area to develop that, or good tectonic area to develop hydrocarbons. And then we knew that there was a Karoo shale that had a trend that we thought intersected with this rift play. But again, back to original questions, we're early days in the development of, or really not even the development, in the exploration of this play. So there is risk. We feel that a lot of the elements are coming together, and we're seeing that in the first couple wells, but very nascent.
Your comments about Namibia, Botswana being, in my view, probably the top two jurisdictions in Africa at this point, given South Africa a bit on decline, at least in my book, as far as, stability goes. Also thank the Germans and the Australians. They've put together over the decades, whether it be exploration and natural resource companies, et cetera, have put together a good framework for natural resource development in the country, plus a solid footing as far as, the political history of the country, Namibia specifically. You talked cash on hand. Can you share with us the shares out approximately today, and then also any major shareholders that you'd like to mention that are on the roster?
So from the shares outstanding, what I have most recent, and just for your listeners, we're mainly TSXV, but we also are on OTCQX as RECAF and OXD in Frankfurt. So we have 161 million shares outstanding, fully diluted 185, and then pro forma is about 206. Any of your listeners that would like to dig deeper, basically, this is the data that's on our most recent investor presentation up on our website. And so that data can be brought down and looked at. And then Grayson Anderson, who's our investor relations lead, can also be contacted to check on questions. Share price is Canadian, $8.50. All numbers I'm telling you are Canadian, by the way. So we have a market cap of 1.5 billion right now. We do not carry any debt whatsoever. We have roughly 12% insider ownership. Probably don't want to get into specific names. If someone's really curious, I'd point them to Grayson. I will say that if you look at our technical roster, everybody is an investor. I'm an investor. If you look at the geologists that are on the team, they're investors. I'll say with one exception, which is an academic, and academics, sometimes have a little challenge getting the cash up to invest. But everybody who's working on this project technically is also an investor.
Scott, that's great. And you're referring to some numbers that are a little bit dated, because obviously the audience that are, when they do listen, will probably see a higher share price in the market cap.
They will. And if the
certainly.
Share price we've had several, I think, positives that are moving the share price. I just wanted to kind of keep consistent with what we've have published out there. And so That's what people can find when they go to our website. But yes, there's a lot of folks following us, and there's more recent data for those who can get it.
Well, just, maybe just give the audience a flavor for, your guys' cash level. You stated that realistically, if you guys had to make this cash last out here, and assuming no surprises, does this cash level see you guys through to the third well campaign completion and the 2D seismic completion?
No, as anybody who's been around the business, you drill your first well and you learn some things from the drilling side, efficiencies, what works, what doesn't, kind of bits. I would add to that, especially during the first well, we did our best to put, everything we thought we would need on the boat, bring it up to the well site in terms of spares, extra parts. It's like on a big camping trip with a lot of expenditure. We found that some things were a little faster than we thought. And if everyone remembers to last year and earlier this year, supply chain has been a real challenge. And it's gotten quite a bit better for those of your investors who are working other major capital projects, but it's still a challenge. So why I bring that up is that our first well cost was, higher than we expected. But now in our second well, we have everything on site, and we're not waiting on parts when something breaks. We know we have to have in terms of the inventory for the rig, because this is the first time we've used this rig. It was a brand new rig. So to get to the heart of your question, we actually see ourselves funded for about 6 wells and the seismic at this point. We're not going to drill them all continuous. We're going to, as I say, we learned something from every well, and the seismic's going to be critical, but we're happily quite well funded for a number of wells and our G&A.
Well, Scott, why don't we skip down here and come back to some other questions that I've come up with here. But
Sure.
maybe just give us the critical path outlook for the company here, because we're talking a little bit on operations here. What key items do you expect to accomplish over, say, the next 18 months or so?
Right now, we have our initial 3-well drilling program. We're into the second well. It's going really well. That we'll probably finish that well. We're saying towards end of this month, maybe early July. We're also in the process of gathering permits. We've awarded a contract to Polaris Geophysical up in Calgary. Great company. They worked in Africa quite a bit, so we'll go into a period then of acquiring seismic. 450 kilometers to start of 2D, but inevitably when we see, we'll shoot the seismic, we'll see things interesting and go back and add to that to get some more detail. So I see an initial campaign of drilling, which we're kind of part way through. I see then the seismic acquisition, processing. We're putting up processing contracts as we speak, and then the interpretation of that, and then a next round of drilling that will come up following the seismic data. And maybe to kind of step back to the process of what we're going through. This is, people haven't seen this in a entire process in a while, because there really haven't been that many brand new basins in a while. I mean, the first brand new basin I worked was back up on the North Slope of Alaska back in the day. But the way we're approaching this is, the first thing we want to do is to see if there's a working hydrocarbon system. So can this basin, which we've identified with aeromagnetic data, which is, gives us a good picture of basement, but not what's in it, is there the kind of rocks in thermal history that can potentially generate oil and gas, right? And then are there reservoir rocks that'll store it, And so that's sort of this initial phase. And so the wells we're drilling now would be termed stratigraphic test wells. What's that mean? Well, that means we're really just focused on the rocks. We're drilling the wells, examining all the cuttings, having the geochemistry looked at, every aspect of them, taking sidewall cores, little, if you will, like shotgun shells size samples that you take from the side of the well, shipping those to the US for analysis, looking for oil samples in there, and then obviously running logs, but not flowing anything yet. So we get those stratigraphic test wells, we know what's in the ground, we shoot our seismic. Seismic ties these, very detailed points of data into the broader picture that the seismic imaging presents. And then we get our full view of the basin. So, if stratigraphic test wells are step 1, step 2, you get the seismic, and step 3, then you say, okay, let's map this and see where are the closures, where's the accumulations. And then we start drilling what I would term proper exploration wells. So to answer your question, we'll be drilling proper exploration wells end of this year, early next year. And so those are the steps I see us going through. And once you have those exploration wells, then you can say, okay, here's where I see an accumulation, here's where there could be reserves, and then you look into the actual commercialization. So very measured program, quite stepwise. And the petroleum agreement that we have with the Namibian Ministry of Mines and Energy, mimics this perfectly. It's actually quite a modern, well set up petroleum agreement by Namibia.
And Scott, let's continue to talk some operations here and updates. National Petroleum Corp of Namibia, or NAMCOR, they've started a partnership with you guys. Talk about the importance of having the Namibian government in full support for responsible onshore oil project development, and of course, this new partnership.
Yeah, we're really excited about working with NAMCOR. So, sort of the background is that if you look at the petroleum agreement we signed with Namibia back in 2015, and it's similar to most that you'd find, around the world. That agreement calls for the setting aside of 10% of the acreage for the national oil company. So that's NAMCOR, and that they are carried, if you will, which means we pay their costs until commercialization. So, basically, we've always kind of been in this relationship. We've now got it down to where we have a joint operating agreement that says this is how we all behave, this is how we do budgets and drill wells and everything else. Quite standard stuff, but we're really happy to go forward. And so they're now our partner going forward. It's us and NAMCOR working shoulder to shoulder. And, they're extremely excited about it, as is, really I can say across the ministries about the potential for what we see in Kavango. But, NAMCOR is now officially our partner. We have our working relationship established, and I couldn't be happier.
Let's move on here just a little bit more on operations, and then let's come back to ESG. You're ex-Halliburton. You've laid forth this schedule for us here that'll definitely span into next year, no problem. If things go as intended and things are showing up as things are showing up now and going forward here, and as the geotechnical team confirms, what is your expectation on a potential cost profile for a meaningful operation and suitable wells?
So again, this is conventional development, so we're looking at vertical wells. We're learning about how best to design these. I think a reasonable number would be to be conservative, would be 10 million a well. I think those numbers come down as you fine tune where you are, but we're not doing expensive things like fracking. We're not drilling long horizontals. We're looking to this as a conventional hydrocarbon system, and that's what the rocks are telling us so far. We're seeing all the components that make that up. And so throwing out a conservative number, but I think, when we do our economics, we can be quite positive about the viability of a project like this from an economic perspective.
Go a little bit further here, Scott, and talk, the jurisdiction in terms of infrastructure here. We know it really well, Namibia, just for the purposes of various uranium and gold vehicles that we cover, in country and have in our portfolios.
Sure.
But talk about the infrastructure that's already in place in Namibia, and then your guys' process should something become commercial. What's the process?
One of the learnings that we have is over the years is, if you have an oil discovery, and we certainly see oil in these first two wells, there's always gas there as well. And so you have to think of the two simultaneously, and that's what we're doing. So and obviously, as per our net zero commitment, we're not going to flare. So the way we're looking at monetization at this point is kind of twofold. For oil, the road infrastructure and the electricity infrastructure is already quite good. It's really amazing how good the roads are. It was quite straightforward to get the rig from Walvis Bay, from the boat, up into our first well site, in Kavango East. And there's the roads are already there. I've been in some place where you'll have a discovery in a certain country, and you have to helicopter everything in there, right? And so we're very fortunate in that regard for that piece of the infrastructure. We still have to build roads. We still have to do a lot of work, but the basics are there, and the economic infrastructure is there. From a product standpoint, the thinking is that kind of like in North America, we would initially truck oil to a railhead in a place called Groupe Fontaine, work with and we're already starting to work with the railroad to do discussions about, okay, can we get oil cars here? And then take it from rail to the coast again at Walvis Bay, where we would need to build a crude infrastructure. But there's already been, inquiries made into that by others. The bay itself is quite suited for deep water tankers, and then this part of the world, the oil traders, the Trafiguras, Vitols are pretty active. So if you look at sort of scenario one for oil, if you will, marketing, that's what we're looking at. And we're in light of the fact that we've been successful in determining that there is in fact an active conventional hydrocarbon system, we're taking those discussions to the next level. On top of that, there's also talk of rail going all the way past us to the east for copper mines. That's great. We're looking into that as well. For gas, there is some technologies that really weren't quite commercial a couple of years ago, but are now, and it relates to something called gas to power. So in that regard, the idea is that instead of building gas pipelines hither and yon, at least for the initial monetization, we would look at building a gas to power plants closer to the wells themselves, and then converting that to electricity, and then we move electricity. That's if you go to Angola, there's a gas to power plant near the LNG facilities. I know Botswana's looked into this for some of their coal bed methane plants, and it's common in India as well. So we're looking into that as sort of the first steps in terms of providing a place to take our gas and to monetize it. And to be clear, this would be a wonderful boom for the area and for Namibia. You know, Namibia right now is a complete importer of energy, 100% import, and it's all from South Africa. So there's a lot of reasons you might think about why energy independence is really, really attractive, and it can start out both as gas to power, and ultimately, if there's a market to build a refinery, yeah, they'd have oil independence. But that's the current scenarios we're looking at.
Okay, this is interesting because obviously South Africa, a good chunk comes from nuclear power. And you're right, Namibia needs to have more independence on energy in country. So this sounds like a really good way to go. And it's certainly the cleaner of the fossil fuels as far as going with some kind of a gas arrangement. So I think that makes sense. Any discussion in the future? I know this is longer term, but is there any consideration for refinement of products in country, Scott, or do you really see this going to Walvis Bay and jumping on a tanker?
We've been approached by several parties. There's one party that's been looking at this for a while to build a refinery in the Walvis Bay area, which obviously would be great for us. And we encourage that. You know, we're an upstream company right now, but there's at least three groups that have sent materials to us about the idea. I think ultimately, as Namibia becomes more and more economically strong and independent, refining capacity still makes sense. And so we look forward to seeing some of those projects succeed.
Well, let's bump into good old ESG for a moment. The company is aware and you are aware of, misaligned groups such as National Geographic is negative on the work you're doing for Namibia and for the local community and environment. Of course, National Geographic sometimes likes to run around the world and think that they're the ones who make the decisions. But, you know, the community and government, though, their support, Scott, is mission critical here. So maybe just talk to your guys' commitment to net zero, specific work such as water development. I know you guys are doing some work on that front and other initiatives that you've already mentioned, like energy. What are you guys doing to really prove up Recon's alignment with all the critical parties involved?
Well, you hit the nail on the head, whereas if we have to have the support of both the folks who live around our project in East and West Kavango, as well as the government in Namibia and the country itself. And so we actually have a Namibian affiliate that is run by Namibians. That's what we have, a management team that's all local. Right now, we're employing about 250 odd folks over in various projects, and this will grow over time. Exploration is not as intensive as, say, as you get to development, but providing jobs, providing the ability for people to have work and maybe see a way to get their kids to go to college and stuff. To me, that's just really, really critical. And I've always been committed to, as soon as you can go local, you go, and you go as fast as you can, and bring in expats for both critical topics and for training. So we're well down the road to that. We have a great team in Namibia right now. Now, in terms of that, probably falls in the area of say, social, of the ESG. From the environment side, there's a couple of things that we're doing. First, when Craig Stanky and I went up to Kavango for the first time, it really struck us that we would see women walking along the roads with these large, for lack of a better word, barrels or buckets on their heads, just carrying water. And then we start asking around, oh, how far are you carrying the water? Well, sometimes it's 10 kilometers that they're carrying this water, because it's still basically a rural area outside of the main city of Rundu. There are folks, in sort of subsistence living. There's poverty, but everybody has the right to clean water. And what we discovered as we drilled our own first water well, they have a fantastic aquifer about 200 meters deep, really good, clean water. So we've started a program of drilling community water wells, just so that people don't have to walk so far to bring water, to cook and clean and all that. And so we've drilled 4 so far. The water wells that each of our exploration wells or stratigraphic test wells are using, those wells are going to be donated to the community. And so, we feel that that's just a critical need for any area. Our right is to have clean water. So we're working on that as one of our critical programs. We're trying to permit up to another 16 wells to be spread over the area, not necessarily where we're drilling our wells, but just where the need is. Second area that struck us and we're beginning to move more strongly into now is if you fly into the region, Windhoek is in the south and you fly to the Kavango up in the north, you're struck by this sort of checkerboard pattern in the flight. You look down of basically areas that have been sort of, I won't say scorched, but deforested, farmed, what have you. And it's basically a combination of, frankly, illegal deforestation. There are valuable trees that unfortunately get in the hands of the wrong people and are shipped to other countries for, commercial purposes. And there's just subsistence farming that'll take an area, farm it up, and then it'll be gone. So the, of course, driver is poverty, right? Nobody wants to have your area stripped of some of its best wood and have it shipped out. But if you need the money, that's kind of what you do. And subsistence farming, they have to live. So very clearly, there's a need to reforest, and we're working with the Ministry of Environment, which manages forestry, to look at starting programs right away to identify the right types of trees. We're going to use one of our well sites as a nursery, actually. See the best way to grow them and start reforesting some of these sort of blighted squares of the area. And that can adds to net zero obviously efforts, but it's really more important about being a good citizen and helping things that have been done wrong and seeing if we can make it a little better.
Scott, I think these are sensible solutions. And a few things that I thought of when you were talking here is, obviously the governance part of it will also be part of this. And then, of course, the Namibian government, if something's economically viable, that there'll be a lot of good solutions as far as, economic support for the local community first, and then, of course, to the national government and then beyond. But then also the local community getting that type of support from you guys, because I've seen on conservation, I've seen B2 Gold, Clive Johnson and the club over there at B2 Gold have done the black rhino conservation work by minting, gold coins and so forth, and proceeds going towards that conservation work specifically in Namibia. And some of these ideas and these solutions that are coming up, how do we help with poverty? How do we listen to what the community wants us to do? And things like water development. I don't see folks like National Geographic coming out here and actually offering up viable, sensible opportunities and solutions. I don't see them writing any checks. And what's their solution for poverty? I've not seen it. I appreciate you showing some of those initiatives. And as you guys grow, obviously those initiatives are going to become larger and probably proportion to your guys' growth. I appreciate you sharing some of those thoughts and, of course, hearing some of mine.
Yeah, no, you had some great ideas, and you're exactly right. And B2 Gold's done some wonderful projects, and there's things that we want to build on. I think a quote that always comes back to me is one of our communication director was up in the San area. The San are a native people. There, where they live, spans into Angola and Zambia and other areas. And his quote was, responding to a question, from a reporter is, well, you guys just want us to look the same way we always have so you can take pictures on vacation. I just thought that was very, very telling. And, some groups, there's a vested interest in taking pictures on vacations for people. And, it's a business, that's fine. But we're trying to get a little more broad than that. We
Sure.
really want to have people have jobs. We want to have them be able to have line of sight to their kids if they want to go into college and do other things, to be able to do that. And yeah, you're exactly right. Not everybody who's worried about the areas cares about that. They
Yeah.
worry about
Yeah.
their own initiatives.
Sure. I mean, what about the people there? What about sustaining their future? And you do that through economic initiatives. There's no other way, unless you're
Yeah,
just going to write and hand out checks, which does
yeah,
not
that
provide a good
that never works.
message
And
either.
there's a lot of work to getting to know the people. So, and
Sure.
I would encourage any of your listeners, Namibia is a wonderful place to visit. If you go to Windhoek, you'll think you're in Southern California. There's a lot of beautiful places to go, and great people. Um, but it really does come down to knowing the Kavango area. And so there is the government, the governors, if you will. There is what they call the traditional authorities, which represent, kind of the sort of the groups, the organization and governments that predate the Western ones. And then there's sort of the local councils. And so to really get to know the area, you just can't parachute in and parachute out. You have to kind of understand the various stakeholders, and that takes time, and that's what I'm making sure we invest in.
Certainly agreed on that thought process. Um, we would like to continue to see other groups in the country that are developing natural resources continue to enhance their efforts. You know, the Chinese have substantial stakes in uranium mines. Racine,
Hmm.
Husab, not too far from Walvis Bay. What are they doing to help enhance the community and the nation? Even existing operators like Paladin. Is the current Paladin bringing forth and continuing the initiatives of the prior management team during the last uranium cycle? You know, these types of questions that these operators should be doing, and even little initiatives that folks like Hayadon at Osino Resources is doing, and that's just an exploration company with this advancing gold deposit. It's good to see some good actors, and I think we'll see more of that as we continue here. So appreciate your guys' support of the
Well,
community.
yeah,
And
I've seen it.
yeah,
I've worked in a lot of constituencies in Africa, and I've seen it done wrong, right? And so, even though we're just in the exploration phase, I suppose from a perspective of other companies at this phase, we're over investing in ESG. But we just feel really strongly that's the way to do it, and that we are here at the invitation of the Namibian government. So we want to make sure that we're providing benefit from the get-go.
that's correct. And as far as I'm concerned, the sovereign nation, Namibian government, and the local community are the authorities here, nobody else.
Exactly.
So let's move on here. I think we beat ESG to death, but let's go to TSX upgrade potentially. You know, you guys have got a bigger market cap here. We've seen not just, in oil and gas, but we've seen a lot of natural resource companies that are TSX listed either on the venture or TSX. As that market cap starts to grow to that, half a billion to billion area, they start to look to upgrade their listings. Anything you can share on that front as far as consideration to getting up on the TSX big board or NYSE Amex exchange?
Well, to me, it's all underpinned on us delivering to our investors what we say we're going to deliver. I'm really proud of what we've been able to do, both operational and logistically. During COVID, get our rig, buy a rig, get it refurbed, get it on a boat, get it across. Work with all of our third-party partners, Halliburton and Schlumberger and all the other guys to make these first wells go, and then to get the results such that we do see hydrocarbons, really exceeding our expectations pre-drill, and not just the first well, but the second well. So to me, for Recon Africa, it's all about us being able to deliver to investors what we say we're going to do. Now, so that gets interest, and that gives us the opportunity to potentially upgrade. And I can't get specific, but yeah, your question is 100% logical, and we're looking, I'd say, quite deeply at moving up on the exchange side. I don't want to foreshadow yet, but watch this space is what I would say.
Well, Scott, appreciate that. Wrapping up here, potential investors who are on the sidelines listening in the audience here, the market cap of the company as we chat stands about 1.9 billion Canadian dollars. What would you say to them at this stage and at current price levels? Why should they consider Recon Africa now after this good run on the shares?
Well, like I say, I think what their share price reflects, putting aside all the new trends we see in shorts and everything else, is purely reflective of our ability to deliver, and we're going to continue to do that. Um, uh, whether it's through these current wells, through our seismic, and as we get into the exploration phase. So I think the market cap reflects the capabilities of the company, and we're going to just keep proving that as we move towards our refinement of our ideas and move towards commercialization.
Well, if we get anywhere close to, what some things have been indicated from Dan Jarvie and others, it's certainly possible we can see this go a lot higher here. And some analysts out there also have some higher expectations. Best way for investors to reach out to the company?
So if you go through our website, there are investor inquiries. It's investors@reconafrica.com. Just send an email to that. Our IR manager, Grayson Anderson, is quite quick to do that. He lives in the UK, so that's his time zone. So in case you wait a little longer, but he'll be back to you quite quickly. And then for general inquiries, admin, or I guess we can provide more specific. If your investors want to get more specific, I guess Andrew, I can give you Grayson's contact, and we can work through you to that.
Well, Scott, it's been a pleasure. Appreciate you taking the time with us here, and we're looking forward to following the continuing work at Recon. Keep up the efforts, and let's stay in touch.
Yeah, thanks for the time, Andrew. It's really a pleasure to reach out to your investors, and it's one of the most exciting plays in the world. I feel quite fortunate to be here.